On this edition of Early Look, I'm going to be previewing the lightweight rematch between Charles Oliveira and Michael Chandler taking place at UFC 309 in the co-main event. My name is James Lynch. If you've never watched a show before, I'm going to go through a bunch of different stats and intangibles, and then I'm going to give you my prediction at the end. I would love to hear your prediction in the comments, which way you see this one going. We'll get into everything here today as far as both fighters and what they bring to the table. I'll also talk briefly about their first fight, which occurred a couple years ago, and talk a bit about that. Let's do a quick tail of the tape like we usually do on this show. Charles Oliveira, 35 years old, Michael Chandler, 38. So not a huge age gap. You know, people think of Oliveira maybe being a bit younger, although maybe they also think he's older because he's been in the UFC for a while. Oliveira is 34-10, Chandler's 23-8, 5'10" to 5'8", 74 to 71.5. So Oliveira going to be a little bit longer, a little bit taller, and he's also a little bit younger. We're going to start first though with Oliveira, the former UFC lightweight champion. Let's have a look. Do Bronx, I mentioned it there, 34-10. Oliveira is, so I'm just about to get stuff up here. 1 second. Where are we here? There we go. Oliveira, I mentioned it there, 34-10. He's going to be 2 inches taller and have a 2.5 inch reach advantage. He's the number 2 ranked lightweight. He's the former UFC lightweight champion. He's a 3rd degree BJJ black belt. He has most submission wins in UFC history at 16. He's also got the most submission wins in UFC lightweight history, which would make sense. He's got performance of the night 13 times. We're not going to name all of them, but that's pretty impressive. He's also got fight of the night 3 times. 2 against Nick Lentz and 1 against Frankie Edgar. He made his amateur debut way back in November of 2007. You can see it there. Made his pro debut in March of 2008. Made his UFC debut in August of 2010. It's been a while. He's made his debut against Darren Elkins, which people forget back in the day. So also had a fight for Ring of Combat. I never knew that. Anyways, interesting there. Oliveira is 22-10 in the UFC with 20 stoppage victories. Some notable wins include Jeremy Stephens, Miles Jury, Kevin Lee, Tony Ferguson, Michael Chandler, Dustin Poirier, Justin Gaethje, and Beneil Dariush. Some notable losses include Jim Miller, Donald Cerrone, Cub Swanson, Frankie Edgar, Max Holloway, Anthony Pettis, Paul Felder, Islam Makhachev, and most recently, Arman Tsarukyan. He started his career at 170. If you look at some of his earlier fights, fought 7 times at 145 pounds, missed weight 4 times, also missed once at 155 against Gaethje, although there's some weird stuff going on with the scales at that point. And so he's fought in multiple weight classes, one thing to kind of keep in mind. He's had just one major layoff in his career. He's mostly been pretty active. Going from Beneil Dariush to Arman Tsarukyan, there was a 308-day layoff in that fight. Remember, he had the cut. He was supposed to fight Islam. So overall, he's been pretty active. If you look at it here, fighting at least twice a year, and for the most part, one of the more active fighters on the roster. We're not going to go through all of his injuries or layoffs or things like that. He's only had one close fight in his career, and that was his last fight against Arman Tsarukyan. And if you go look on MMA decisions right now, I mean, I did think Arman won this one. That was back at UFC 300 in April. Majority did feel like Arman won, but I was surprised to see that we had at least 8 people think that Oliveira won that one, but 21 scored it for Arman. So again, it's not like Charles looked bad in that fight. Arman's, I think, the future, got it done. Arman's going to be fighting Islam next. Not a bad loss on the resume, so to speak, if you're losing to a guy like Arman Tsarukyan. I wanted to bring up the first Chandler fight that they had. So that was back when Oliveira was champion, and that was at UFC 262. That was a fight which Oliveira won by a second round knockout and got a lot of accolades. Greatest, 19th ranked, greatest lightweight fight of all time, greatest comeback of all time, best fight of the year, ranked number 5 in 2021. These are all fan voting, by the way, not UFC voting. That took place in Houston, Texas. If you go back and watch the fight, so first round, Oliveira going with the leg kicks. Chandler did hit Oliveira in that first round, and that's when he ended up shooting for a takedown. And Oliveira had to recover as well in that first round. If you actually watch the fight, Chandler won the first round. I think there's a pretty good argument for it. Now, the second round was a different story. Immediately, Oliveira tagging Chandler with a left hand and gets the TKO finish, a rare TKO finish. Of course, Oliveira, I mentioned the accolades of him having submission victory, so finishing Chandler in that fight. But that first fight, again, I do want to remind people, it was close. Again, if we were just looking at the first round, Chandler won that. Oliveira coming back and getting it done. Even it says it here, greatest comeback of all time. They ranked it number 30. I don't think it was too much of a comeback, but still very interesting there. Let's look at some stats for Oliveira. If you look at it here, significant strikes landed per minute, 3.39. His striking accuracy is at 53%. His striking defense is at 51%, so he does get hit a bit. His takedown average is 2.17. His takedown accuracy is at 40%, and his takedown defense is at 55%. That is pretty much everything you need to know about Charles Oliveira and what he brings to the table against Michael Chandler. But let's now talk about Iron Michael Chandler, his opponent. getting this rematch. Of course, he had to wait. I mean, he's got a long layoff coming into this fight. We'll talk about that in a sec, after waiting out for a Conor McGregor fight, which may never happen. But hey, credit to Chandler for taking this fight anyways. It's a big fight for the UFC New York card. He's currently ranked number 6 in the lightweight division. He's 38 years old, 5'8" with a 71.5 inch reach. He's a 3-time Bellator lightweight champion. He's also the Bellator Season 4 lightweight tournament winner. Former NCAA Division I wrestler out of the University of Missouri. He splits time between Killcliff FC and Nashville MMA. He's got performance of the night 2 times against Dan Hooker and Tony Ferguson. He's got fight of the night 2 times against Justin Gaethje and Dustin Poirier. Never had an amateur debut. Went straight to the pros in August of 2009. Only had just a couple fights. I think people forgot he actually fought for Strikeforce. And then made his Bellator debut with just 3 fights. And that's where he basically made a name for himself and built himself up. Chandler is 2-3 in the UFC, but has not, like I said, has 5 UFC fights, which isn't a whole lot. Some notable wins include Dan Hooker, Eddie Alvarez, Benson Henderson. Eddie Alvarez and Benson Henderson were in Bellator, and then also has a win over Tony Ferguson. It's only notable because we know who he is as far as like a good win. Tough to say because Ferguson was on quite the losing streak. And then he's got some notable losses, obviously against Gaethje, Oliveira, and then in Bellator, Patricio Pitbull, Eddie Alvarez, and lost twice to Will Brooks. He also lost to Dustin Poirier in his last fight as well. So again, when people look at Chandler's career, you got to look, he's fought sort of the who's who. He fought everyone he needed to in Bellator and fought even some notable names here in UFC, except for Conor McGregor. The layoff, going from Poirier to Oliveira, longest layoff of his career. It's going to be 735 days. So we'll see if that plays a role. Again, I'm always a little bit concerned about fighters who are older and have long layoffs coming into fights. That's not good. Chandler's had a couple close fights that were in Bellator. I do think they're worth mentioning. So if we go look at Bellator 106, we're going way back here. The fight against Eddie Alvarez. It was a split decision loss. If you go look at MMA decisions right now and you see how people scored that one, 10 media members scored the fight for Chandler, 3 media members scored the fight for Alvarez. So that should have been a win. So again, his record could look a little bit different. But then if you look at the split decision against Will Brooks at Bellator 120, 1 scored it for Brooks, 7 scored it a draw, and 5 scored it for Chandler. So a majority felt it should have been a draw, just something to keep in mind. And more had it scored for Chandler than it for Brooks. So something interesting there. Also, he had that weird fight against Will Brooks, which is just, if go watch it if you have the chance, Bellator 131. Chandler basically like does one of these and says, I'm done. It's a really weird fight. But, you know, he's that was back in 20. I mean, we're talking a fight 10 years ago, but is kind of an interesting fight kind of looking back, because Chandler obviously had a lot of success after that, not losing for quite some time. His only loss in between there was the Primus injury, and then he had the Patricio Pitbull fight as well, which was a bit odd as far as that went down. Let's look at the stats for Michael Chandler right now. You can see significant strikes landed per minute, 4.89. His striking accuracy is at 46%. His striking defense is at 46%. So worse than Oliveira. He gets hit more than Oliveira does. His takedown average is 2.17. His takedown accuracy is at 38%. And his takedown defense is at 71%. And keep in mind, these are just UFC stats. He's only had 5 UFC fights. So the data here is not going to be anywhere near what Oliveira has, because you have way more of a sample size with Oliveira. Just something to keep in mind when you're looking at those numbers. Let's look at the odds right now from bestfightodds.com. Again, great site to find all the odds from different books. Do we have odds on this fight? Yes, we do. Oliveira, minus 245, about minus 250, even as high as minus 265. The comeback on Michael Chandler's around plus 200, around there. Understandable. Chandler older. He's already lost to him, and he's got a long layoff coming into this. And if you look on Tapology right now, a little bit closer. Actually, I'm surprised by this. Oh, no, sorry. That was the first fight. Never mind. We want to look at the... it was close in the voting the first time. The second time around, different story. 86% of people picking Oliveira, 14% picking Michael Chandler. So which way do I see this fight going? Well, I think like most people, and if you've watched my channel for a long time, you know how high I am on Charles Oliveira. I think the only time I picked against him recently was his last fight against Arman Tsarukyan. I thought Arman would win that. He's younger, got a little bit more to bring, but I was on the Oliveira train for a while, including a fight against Islam Makhachev, which his fans have yet to forgive me for. They still think that was some sort of blasphemy pick, but I have no regrets about picking him at the time. Yeah, I'm going Charles Oliveira here. No surprise. I think Oliveira is going to get it done, though. This time, not by knockout, but by submission. Now, here's why. Let's go through some of the reasons why. So if you look at it there, the majority of Oliveira's wins are by submission, 62%, a pretty big margin over knockout and pretty big margin over decision. Now, this is a 5-round fight, even though it's not a title fight. 5 rounds. I do think we'll see a finish here. I'd be pretty surprised if this does go the distance, although Chandler has gone the distance in a couple fights with them just being 3 rounds. Chandler's only been submitted once in his... Chandler has only been submitted once in his career, which only makes up for 13% of his losses. But I could see Oliveira doing something where maybe he knocks Chandler down. We've seen Chandler get knocked out and him going for the submission there. I mean, like, if you get knocked down and you got Charles Oliveira on you, chances are you're going to lose by submission unless he decides to go full out TKO. So again, I think Oliveira most likely, most of his fights do end by submission. Chandler has a huge layoff coming into this. Like I mentioned, he's 38, he's older. I know he's always training, but it's always different when you're fighting, you're in the cage as opposed to just training. And Oliveira just fought this year. So Oliveira's been, again, you got Michael Chandler who's got a long layoff facing someone in Oliveira who not only has a win over him, but also is very, very, very active as well. And the other thing I'll argue too is, like I mentioned it there, Oliveira's coming off that loss to Arman Tsarukyan. I mean, Arman's fighting for the title next. Chandler's had one title shot against Oliveira, but outside of that, like, he hasn't been able to get over the hump. We've seen one thing we know about Michael Chandler. He has not established himself as a contender since losing to Charles Oliveira. He hasn't been able to get back there. He's lost, again, he's losing to good opposition, but again, Gaethje was pretty unanimous there. Got finished by Poirier as well. I mean, these are good fighters, but these are guys that Oliveira beat, right? Including, obviously beat Chandler as well too. And kind of what I was getting at with the fight with Arman, like, Arman's fighting for the title next. It's not like Oliveira was close to getting finished in that fight or looked terrible. Like, I thought he looked fine. I just think Arman's better at this point. So I don't think that's a terrible loss. The Islam fight was very one-sided. Again, Islam, I think, is just that good. And I think Oliveira also was not at his best. And then we saw in the Dariush fight taking care of business. But I mean, you can't look over this run he has. Chandler, Poirier, Gaethje, even Ferguson, that was a dominant win. Kevin Lee. He's had some good wins and he's fought, like I said, overall better opposition, I think. And the other thing, what's a path to victory here for Chandler? He's got some power. He could get a knockout, kind of like what he did against Dan Hooker. But if you look at it, Oliveira's hard to finish by knockout. His last knockout loss was in 2017 against Paul Felder. He's most likely not going to get submitted, although Islam did that. Again, I think there's more ways for Oliveira to win. I could see Oliveira getting another TKO as well. But like I said, I'm going to stick with submission. I think Oliveira gets it done. And I think he impresses. I just think it's going to take a little bit longer. I think in that first fight with Oliveira and Chandler, Oliveira was a bit more reckless. And I think since the Islam fight, we haven't really seen that. I think he's been, been a bit more calculated, not as open to getting hit as much as maybe as in other fights as well. So, yeah, that's just my thoughts on this fight. I do think Oliveira wins. And I think he'll do it a little bit later in this fight as opposed to earlier. But, I could be wrong. That's why I want to hear from you in the comments. So I want to know what you guys think in the comment section below. What's your prediction? Also, make sure you hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell on this video. Helps out my channel big time. My name is James Lynch. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.